so that we wouldn't look at the actual problem, which was white supremacy. When I think of the model minority myth, I grew up wanting to be white. I fucking hate that about myself. Like, it is so embarrassing.
Okay, so statistically, it is true that Asians, right, on average, make more money, in terms of medium, make more money, better test scores, get into better colleges, all that stuff. I think the question is, why is that? And I don't know, model minority, whatever that label wants to mean.
That's actually a myth because we cannot be...
Well, no, listen, well, let me finish my point. We need to observe what makes people successful and unsuccessful. And I think when you look at trends that are generally true in the Asian community, not of everyone, but are generally true, usually you have families that are sticking together. You have, you know, people are taught to work hard in school, not get into trouble. I think that translates to why Asians en masse are successful. And I don't think you have to be Asian or white for that matter to not have kids out of wedlock, not, you know, commit crime, not cause trouble or whatever it is. It's just a matter of like, well, common sense, that's what makes people successful. And if that's so-called assimilation, having a nuclear family, buying a house, going to school, whatever it is, then yeah, okay, call me a pro-assimilation then.
I think there's a difference between assimilation and erasure.
Yes.
All right, folks, we got a special video for you here today because December 14th is actually the 1-year anniversary of the Vice panel. And for people who are unfamiliar, long story short, Vice News invited me to New York to sit on a panel with a bunch of Asian liberals to debate Asian issues. And well, it basically went the way you'd expect. There's a lot of legendary and viral moments in it. And so I figure, again, on the anniversary of that great day, I would put together a compilation reliving some of my favorite clips. And so we're going to do that in this video. So with that said, folks, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And without further ado, here is the celebration of my 1-year anniversary on Vice News, which, by the way, made them bankrupt. Apparently, because they're now bankrupt. Anyways, here it is.
A few weeks ago, Vice held a panel discussion with young Asian Americans. And here's how they describe the point and theme of the conversation. What does it mean to be Asian in America? From hate crimes to the model minority myth to affirmative action, a politically divisive panel hashes out the most controversial issues facing the AAPI community today. Now, this is the kind of discussion, especially when hosted by an outlet like Vice, that is nearly certain to be excruciatingly boring and annoying. It's already guaranteed that the panel will be stacked with leftists, and leftists are ideologically required to never say anything remotely interesting, especially when the subject has anything to do with race or ethnicity. But fortunately for the viewers, there was at least one young man who managed to make it onto the panel despite having a mind of his own. A Twitter user named Calum posted a couple of videos featuring this man. Vince is his name. And his contributions to the conversation are quite interesting. The clips are revealing and instructive and also kind of hilarious, not because of what Vince says. I mean, what he says is good and is correct, but there's nothing hilarious about saying something that's true. What makes it funny is because of how the other people on the panel react to him saying those things. So watch this.
Assimilation. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a burden? Is it an opportunity?
I think assimilation is not just a great thing, it's a necessary thing. No society can hold together where people have nothing in common, they don't speak the same language, they don't practice the same things. And you know, you may look at something like just food habits or what you eat and think that's fairly frivolous, but the truth of the matter is that on a broader level, when we're talking about more big picture things, differences in race, culture, religion, all these things, people have fought wars, violent wars, killed each other over these things for thousands of years. If America is to hold together, assimilation, not just good or bad, necessary. I don't think it's going to be possible for America to survive as a stable, functioning society if people don't, to some degree, say, well, here's what we're going to commonly agree upon.
But who gets to choose it?
The majority culture, I suppose.
And what's majority culture?
The people with power.
And who's people with power?
Who's people with power?
White people.
Well, I don't know if that's...
I'm gonna say it.
Yeah.
White people. It's okay.
I don't know if that's necessarily so true. I mean,
Wait, can you
look
unpack?
at,
Yeah.
Let's elaborate.
I don't think a particularly white, quote unquote, interest controls things like
in America,
pop culture.
Do you believe white supremacy exists?
I think there are people who believe in it. I think there's people who all believe that their race is superior.
So you don't believe in white supremacy?
Do you believe America is a white supremacist state?
No. Not at all.
And not found.
No white supremacist state would even like allow us to be doing this. Like I don't understand. So white supremacists, there's just KKK people walking. Actually, I go around New York City. I notice that like I guess Brooklyn a little bit different. Most of the people here are not white and they're doing their thing. So I don't understand.
What does doing their thing mean to you?
Going to work.
Are they making the same amount of money?
I gotta say, I like this Vince guy. I mean, I like him for all the reasons that everyone else on the panel is shocked and horrified by him. First of all, his point about assimilation is obviously correct. A nation must be bound together, united by more than just the simple fact that all of its people exist inside the same geographical boundary. And that's even more the case today when the geographical boundary is so porous and apparently, according to this administration, negotiable. So we have to have something else holding us together. To be a people, not just people, but to be a people, we must have a shared culture, shared values, shared traditions, a shared language.
I think there's a difference between assimilation and erasure.
Yes.
The way that you're kind of going about it seems like, okay, like, you know, of course, like, we want to be in community with people. And I don't think there's a problem with being in community with people from different backgrounds. That's not the issue. It's also embracing the diversity that we inherently have and accepting that and being okay with that and celebrating that.
That's very idealistic, I think, but I think we should acknowledge the fact that diversity, quote unquote, is not a factor that is our strength. It's not a factor that historically or even in the current strengthens societies. People don't come together, form societies, form families, form communities because they have nothing in common. They come together and do those things because they have something in common. Right?
You look on the people's faces, they say, oh, is he really telling people not to commit crimes? Is he, oh my gosh, what is he? And then at the end, at the very, very tail end of that clip, you get the thrust of the libs argument. They say, well, look, come on. What you're talking about, that's not assimilation, that's erasure. Erasure is the lib term that describes when you disrespect and erase different cultural groups and racial groups is usually how it's applied. Which is to say, the libs are suggesting that crime is just an integral part of certain races and cultures, which that sounds like the kind of argument that if we said it, they would call that racist.
You talk about race in such black and white terms. The way you talk about it is it's either with America, whatever your definition of America, or not. You're talking in very black and white terms, and that's actually the problem in discussing race, because we're Asian Americans, we're neither black, we're neither white. When you're having a race discussion, you can't be talking about in such like lines. Yeah. Everything is in the gray.
The more in common that a society has with one another, the more likely they are to work together and build things in society and not constantly be fighting each other and at odds with each other.
Did you think the Japanese internment was a good thing? Because that was a real assimilation situation. You know what I mean?
No,
Do you recognize that the term assimilation has negative history and facts associated with that word? So we do have to be careful in how we choose, because assimilation for people of color have not been good to us historically. That's factual. So let me ask you.
We're discussing the model minority myth and the fact that
Japanese internment is a classic example of assimilating Asian Americans.
No, it's not. It's a classic example of internment. I mean, they intern people.
The clip that I didn't watch the whole thing, but I want you to explain it. The fool was talking about, he was talking about genders or whatever, and you rolled your eyes at that guy and like.
So he came in and introduced himself as I'm Zayad, I have my he/him pronouns.
Yeah, he/him pronouns. That's
and
what he said.
Yeah, I just rolled my eyes. I'm glad the cameras caught it because I was like, it's just a natural reaction. And there's a lot of people who said that was rude. You shouldn't have done that, or you acted triggered. It's like, no, I didn't like yell at him or whatever. But the truth is, the pronoun stuff is ridiculous, and I think ridiculous things need to be ridiculed, right? And really, that's the only way we move back the clock on these issues is we have to start ridiculing people for acting stupid, and when we act scared or we're too, polite. I'm not saying to be rude, but when we ignore ridiculous things, they continue and they get worse. So
right, because as a man, you have him being soft as wet toilet paper.
Yeah,
not standing up for what's real. Acquiescing to the culture.
Yeah.
And, I don't even think he really feels that way, but he's saying what he think he should say. But then somebody like you brings it back to reality.
All these attacks that you're seeing the videos of in San Francisco, New York City, newsflash, they're not being prosecuted as hate crimes. So the more correct way to look at it is what is the primary perpetrator of violence against Asians overall, right? Because if we talk about these videos, we have to count them in the statistics, and we're not doing that. And when we do that, we find, well, I'll tell you this, the plurality top perpetrator of violence against Asians, number one, is not happening in rural America, and number two, is not being done by white people.
So is it black
Extremists
people that are doing it? Like, is it the black and brown people that are doing it?
No, that's exactly
Just inherently violent. Like,
Just say it.
I didn't say that. All I said
beat
was,
around it. Just
all I
say it.
said-
if it's not white people or Asian people, who is it?
All I said, I didn't say anything about, inherently violent. All I said is that if
Well,
it's
now you did.
If it's
no one accused you of that, and now
if
you did.
it's a white-
So like your
No,
bias
no.
is slipping out
It's
there.
clear
anyone let
you
me
wanna
talk here?
say it. You should
Can anyone
just
let me
say it.
talk here?
When it comes to Asian hate, the perpetrator is not a white supremacist in New York.
Correct. That's all I'm saying.
So that's the
all
problem.
that I'm saying.
Like, we don't want to blame one race for violence when that's actually not true.
Is it white people? Is it white people?
It is white people.
Are these attacks happening
It is white
in
people.
rural-
I literally looked up statistics.
You do not have to be white to perpetuate white supremacy. No one's saying it's not hard to govern a heterogeneous society, but it is possible to do a lot better than the way that we're fucking doing it right now. It's like we've banked on this myth of white adjacency more than this model minority myth of like, instead of aligning ourselves with the black community who've been fighting for racial justice and liberation, right, and acknowledging our own privilege and putting our bodies on the line to fight for these movements, instead we banked on white adjacency, and here we are still being pushed into
What is
subways.
first of all, what exactly is white adjacency? Is it working hard, having families?
I don't
understand what the issue is. But then number two, wait, let me finish my point. I think it is gaslighting when, again, the majority of violent attacks against Asians are not being perpetrated by white people to blame white supremacy.
White supremacy as a construct is this idea like that the norm of American is whiteness.
Yes.
That whiteness is the default.
Standard.
That whiteness is the standard that we all ought to aspire to. When we deviate
It's not just
from
talking about KKK.
Yeah.
It's not talking about lynchings. It's about a mentality.
Here's a radical idea. Okay, you guys ready?
No, I'm not.
So there's a lot of violence happening. A lot of it's against Asian people. A lot of it is happening in cities. Crazy idea, I know. Then maybe it's not a good idea to let criminals out of jail. Maybe it's not a good idea to defund the police, neuter the police ability to have any degree of law and order in our streets. And maybe you wouldn't have so much violence happening against so many different types of vulnerable people. I mean, this is just the truth of the situation. You know, the real core of the problem is that there is lawlessness and mass violence and mass crime happening in cities. I think that the Stop Asian Hate movement comes from woke left-wing social movement to kind of make it into this argument of like minorities being persecuted, when I don't think that's the core of the problem. I think the core of the problem is like, it's just dangerous in our—
Because as Vince calmly explains, the benefits of having intact families and discipline and encouraging education, the other panelists were left slack-jawed. You know, they stared in horror, their mouths agape. They shook their heads. They could not believe what they were hearing. They were in close proximity with common sense, perhaps for the first time in their lives, and they found that the experience was terrifying. That, to me, is the most disturbing thing. Yes, obviously, Vince is right about everything he said. Obviously, the other panelists are wrong, but it's not just that they're wrong, okay? You can be wrong about stuff. It's just that it's not just that they don't agree with Vince's common sense, data-backed analysis of the situation. It's really that it's that they were shocked by the analysis. Okay, it's one thing to be wrong, to misinterpret it, to misread it, but you're shocked by it. It's that they apparently had never heard anything like it before. It's one thing to disagree with an obvious truth. It's another to be stunned by it. And that speaks to the suffocating, stifling bubble that these people have been living in. They clearly believe what they believe merely because it's the only belief that was ever presented to them, and they lack the intellectual curiosity to survey the other options. They have nearly totally insulated themselves from everything that might challenge their worldview. So when it does happen, and they finally and by accident encounter such a challenge, they practically faint like damsels in distress. And that's what we saw there. And it's why Vince is not canceled today. In fact, I just found out as I was preparing the segment that Vince has his own YouTube channel, which you can find if you search VinceDao, D-A-O, on YouTube, and you should look him up. He's obviously a brilliant guy. The same cannot be said for the others in the room, and that is why they are today canceled.